A couple of weeks ago, I went down to the library. I like to go to the library because when you are in the library, you are forced to experience the world the way humans used to experience the world before the internet, before social media. The library, everything is just open. You look around, you look at the books, you look at the magazines, you look at the newspapers, and you have to grab something off the shelf based on your own guess of what you think it's about. Then you have to spend some time. You have to spend some energy. You have to expend some brain power to consume this information, then make an independent determination inside your own brain based on whether or not you enjoyed this experience, you enjoyed this book, you enjoyed this magazine article. Whereas the internet, and to a greater extent social media, everything is hyper filtered to give us not only what the internet thinks we should be consuming, but what to think about it before we consume it. A news article pops up on your feed, and the content of the news article is based on all the other stuff you've consumed before, and it comes pre-programmed with a whole bunch of approval, likes and social media approval or social proof approval, authority approval. So before you even consume this information, you already have a subconsciously pre-framed idea that this is important. And so you'll read it through the lens of this is important. Whereas in the library, if you go to the library, you have to make a decision based on your own, and you have to be responsible for your decision by grabbing a book or a magazine. It's not like the algorithms on the internet. It's like if you watch a bunch of TikTok videos and your average TikTok attention span is 4 seconds. But one TikTok shows up and there's a guy, a crazy guy, talking about peanut butter. And you think to yourself, wow, this guy is super interesting. I'm going to pay attention to this guy. And so you watch the peanut butter TikTok for 20 seconds. Now the TikTok algorithm has decided that you are a huge fan of peanut butter. So now all you see are peanut butter news articles. Peanut butter. That's how the internet works. But most people probably don't even have the experience of going into the library and making a decision, reading a book, reading a magazine, and then determining if this is important or not based on your own brain power. Anyhow, I was at the library the other day and I was looking at all the magazines, and I picked up this one magazine on psychology, but it was a non-mainstream magazine on psychology. I got the feeling after reading a couple of articles that this is the kind of psychology magazine where you'd find some information about alien DNA and how alien DNA impacts our modern day psychology. And I was flipping through this article, through this magazine, and I found this fascinating article about how human logic is a hallucination. It started out by talking about the famous Wason selection task. If you're not familiar with the Wason selection task, it's a very interesting puzzle from psychology and anthropology and evolutionary psychology. The first part of the puzzle is you have this logic puzzle. You're given these set of cards, you're given a rule, and on one side of the card it's an even or an odd number, the other side of the card is blue or red, and you're given the rules, and the question is which cards do you turn over to validate whether the rule is being followed or not. And the long and the short of it is that most people fail this because most people can't wrap their brains around this. But the funny thing is, the punchline is this same exact problem when presented within a social situation is easy, super easy. Everybody can understand this problem in a social situation. So this leads psychologists and anthropologists to believe that we do have logical circuits in our brain, but they only work if they're presented within a social context. But the guy who wrote this article was saying that's not entirely true. Because the social context in the Wason selection task is you're a bouncer in a bar and your job is to make sure that everyone that's drinking alcohol is over 21. And the thing is, you're supposed to look for social cheaters. And so the way it's generally presented is that if we're looking through society for social cheaters, for people that aren't following the rules, then we do have logical circuits. But the article writer, the author of the article, who was using a pseudonym because he didn't want to get in trouble, was that every kind of social system is really arbitrary. When we look for social cheaters, there's not really an objectively rational description of who's cheating and who's not. It's all based on a subjective way to organize society. And because we all have different subjective ideas of how we think society should be run, that means our version of who's cheating is going to be necessarily different from somebody else's version of who's cheating. And so because everyone has an idea of how society should behave, but nobody can agree, and we only have these logical circuits within this context of find the social cheater, this means that our logic circuits are really subjective, that human logic is a hallucination, that human logic is a means to an end to impose our own subjective social rules onto society. And every time we try to impose our own subjective social rules onto society, we do so in a way that will benefit us at the expense of other people. This is a subconsciously driven ego flex. And so the long and the short of it is that all human logic exists within this subjective system of constraints that we would very much like to impose on other people so we can benefit at their expense, which means that all human logic is a hallucination. And everything that is based on human logic, mathematics and science and philosophy, is a hallucination, a means to an end. And when this guy discovered this, he was a psychiatrist, and I think he still is a practicing psychiatrist, which is why he wrote this article under a pseudonym, because he didn't want to endanger his career. He started to play around with how he talked to people. And he started off with a presupposition that no matter what kind of problems people say they have, it's based on imaginary logic. It's based on a hallucinated collection of logical thoughts. And all of our thoughts are really hallucinations anyway. So he started to experiment with non-traditional ways to talk to people, non-syntactical ways to talk to people, ways that had nothing to do with vocabulary and syntax, ways that had nothing to do with accepted forms of grammar. And through trial and error, he came up with a kind of linguistic frequency that has nothing to do with vocabulary, a linguistic frequency that's based more on the spaces and the alliteration techniques, or the alliteration components within the language, more like music rather than like words. And he started to speak in terms of frequencies and repetitions and pauses in between the sounds and different sounds followed by other sounds, like he was writing music. And he found a way to temporarily, absolutely blank the brain of the person he was talking to. He came up with a sequence. He would listen to the person talk. He would build up their thought patterns, their thought resonant patterns, their thought waveforms in their brains. He would spit out this absolute nonsense, or what would sound like nonsense from a hallucinated logical sense, but it would completely temporarily blank the thought process or the thought structure in their brain, which made it perfectly easy for him to input a different one. And his theory is also based on the idea that we always need to have a collection of thoughts in our brain. The only time we don't have a collection of thoughts in our brain is when we are unconscious in surgery. Even when we're dreaming, we have thoughts going on and on and on. But only during surgery, they still don't know why this is, our brains completely turn off. This is why when you go to sleep and you wake up, you have this sense that you've lost time. Because even while your conscious mind is turned off, even while you're unconscious, your brain is still thinking all these thoughts. So when you wake up, you have this kind of sense, this subconscious sense that you've lost time. But when you go into surgery, you're completely turned off and you don't have the sense that you've lost time. And that's the only time so far that they've figured out a way to turn off the thoughts in our brain, is to knock you out with some kind of drug. But he figured out to temporarily turn off this thought process while people are awake. in the therapy room. And when people have their thought processes turned off, this creates a massive thought vacuum in their brain, a massive thought vacuum. And when he has his patients, or he had his patients with this massive thought vacuum in their brain, he could easily put ideas in there, and put ideas in there with very simple language structures. And at first, he thought this was just, this couldn't make sense. This can't make any sense. This has got to be some made-up story. But he repeatedly healed his patients in a very short amount of time, over and over and over. He would elicit their problems. He would understand the problem state. He would completely blank their mind with this linguistic structure, this linguistic paced, stochastic, articulated structure that has nothing to do with proper vocabulary and grammar. Then he would say a few words to replace their previous thought pattern with a new thought pattern, and they would have amnesia. They would not remember what happened before this. They would completely forget what happened before this, and their new thought pattern, they would look at it from inside their brain, and they would say, hey, I've had this thought pattern my entire life. And he wanted to see how far he could push this. And so he started to experiment with the different thought patterns he could put inside people's brains. And he could get people to do crazy things. He would just go out in public and he would talk to a shopkeeper. And he would blank their brain, put it in a thought pattern. And the shopkeeper would just hand him all the money in the till. Then he would give the money back and say, I made a mistake. But he wanted to see how far he could push the limits of what he could do. And he said he went through a period of maybe negativity or dark times in his life, and he would walk up to women, blank their thoughts, and he would get them, married women with kids, happy marriages, happy families, willing to go to a hotel and have sex with them just because he blanked their mind and filled it in with this new technology. And he was terrified that this was somehow going to leak out. He was terrified that people were going to learn how to use this technology, that people were going to learn how to blank people's brains and input new thoughts into people's brains to manipulate their brain, to manipulate their psychology, to get them to do whatever you want. But he tried to teach this to people, and it turns out that there only maybe 1 or 2% of the population can wrap their mind around this enough to use this on other people. He doesn't know why, and he's still trying to explore why this is, why only 1 or 2% of the people can use this linguistic technology to blank people's brains and input new thoughts. He said the closest thing he could come up with to describe how difficult this is, to wrap your mind around this, to be able to use this technology, to be able to use this language technology, is those puzzles where you see a word and the word is purple, but the word is written in block letters and the color of the block letters are yellow. And the goal is to look at the word and say out loud the color of the letters instead of what the letters spell out. And this is really, really hard to do. And he said it's kind of like this because your brain has to hold two completely different thoughts in mind while you're speaking in this linguistic staccato, paced out way to blank people's brains. But this guy said that he almost lost his license, which is why he's writing under a pseudonym, because he started to discover this and he wanted to explore this further about how to help people without needing to give them drugs. But he almost got in trouble because, according to him, the psychiatry healthcare system has been essentially taken over by the pharmaceutical industrial complex. And if you're a psychiatrist, if you're healing patients, you almost have like a kind of a quota of how many of your patients you need to continuously prescribe drugs to. So if someone like him comes along and figures out a way to heal people by only talking to them, by changing people's thinking, by only talking to them, that's a threat to the pharmaceutical industrial complex. So he got a lot of low-key kind of warning letters saying you better back off or else. And so he started to research under a pseudonym, and that's why he wrote this article. But that's why I love going to the library. You're forced to look around and make a decision about something in your environment without having that decision made for you, without having that decision not only made for you, but have that decision come pre-programmed with whether or not you should like this idea or not. This is something that a lot of people can't do today. A lot of people need to be told what to think. A lot of people need to be told not only what to think, but how to think about these things. But if you go to the library and if you look around at all the books, you have to choose for yourself. because only people that can choose for themselves are going to survive through the coming AI apocalypse.